All right, so this video is starting at slide 27, and it's kind of a continuation of law of sines and law of cosines. So this is if you were asked to solve the whole triangle. And if you're ever asked to solve a whole triangle, that just means that you need to find all the missing sides and or angles. And to do this, you may need to use any combination of law of sines and cosines. Also can use the idea, that there's 180 degrees in the triangle. So once you know two angles, you can subtract and find the third one. So I'm going to start, and then again, on slide 27, here's the law of cosines and law of sines again. So we're just going to do a few examples. On slide 28, it says solve the triangle. So I know that means any side or angle that's not labeled, I need to find it. It says round angles to the nearest whole number and side lengths to the nearest tenths place. All right, so I'm going to draw this triangle down on my paper, and then we will work it out on the video. So this is triangle X, Y, Z. Angle Y is 148 degrees. Side Z is 12, and side Y is 25. And then there's one of the sides, X, is labeled, but there's not a number there, so I'm not going to write that down. All right, so the way we know how we're going to solve this, or which law we're going to use first, remember, if we know an angle and the side across from it, then we can use law of sines. So in this triangle, we do know an angle and the side across from it. We know sine of 148 over side 25, and that's one complete ratio. The only other thing we know in this triangle is side Z. So the only thing I can solve for right now is angle Z. It's the only, this is the third piece of information I know, so the only thing I can find right now is angle Z. Remember, with law of sines, we're just going to cross multiply. So 12 times sine of 148 is equal to 25 times sine of Z, and divide by 25. So sine of Z is going to equal whatever that decimal is. So right now I'm just going to leave it as this. So I can go to my calculator and I can type that in. Remember, you do want to be in degree mode. I'm going to hit mode and check and make sure that you are in degrees. And if I were to type in 12 sine of 148 divided by 25, again, I'm going to get a very small decimal. And this small decimal is equal to sine of Z. So to solve for my angle Z, I will be doing inverse. So sine of Z is 0.2543, blah, 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 blah. So I will be doing inverse sine of that decimal to get my angle. And you have a couple options. If you've already found the decimal, you can do second sine of the decimal. And we are rounding to the nearest whole number, so that should be fine. 14.7 would mean that it's 15 degrees for angle Z. You also could do inverse sine of that whole fraction that you typed in earlier. So you could do inverse sine instead of getting the decimal first. But again, we're rounding anyways, and you see we get the same answer there, so it's okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to my picture and label that now I know this is 15 degrees. And once I know two angles, I can find the third angle pretty quickly, because remember, the whole triangle does equal 180. So if I do 148 plus 15, then that's 163. And if I subtract that, then that's going to be my third angle. So my third angle is just going to be 17 degrees. So now the only thing I'm missing is side X. You actually can use law of cosines or law of sines now because you know enough information to do both. So if you prefer law of cosines, then you could do a law of cosines. I prefer law of sines, so I'm going to stick to law of sines on this problem. And you definitely want to use x because that's the one we're solving for. So sine of x is equal, or sorry, sine of x over x is equal to. And then you know two full ratios now. I tend to pick the one that is given to me in the problem just in case, I did make a mistake somewhere else, but it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to pick sine of 148 over 25. But you could have picked sine of 15 over 12. Again, 15 is rounded. 17 is also rounded because, we subtracted. So I just pick the one that's given to me if possible. And then cross multiply and divide. 25 sine of 17 equals x times sine of 148, and then divide by sine of 148. And this time when I type that fraction in, I should get my answer. There we go. This time, I'm going to use alpha y equals 25 sine of 17 divided by sine of 148. And I believe it said to round to the nearest tenths place on the side, so that would be 13.8. So we've now solved the entire triangle. We found all the missing sides and angles, and we could go to this side and write that. We could say we found angle X is 17 degrees, side X is 13.8. We found angle Z is 15 degrees, and that's all we found. Everything else was given to us. All right, let's look at another example. All right, let's look at the next one. So again, I'm going to write this one down on my paper. This is on slide 29. Okay, this time I do not know an angle and the side across from it. So if I don't know an angle and the side opposite, I cannot fill out one complete ratio. So I can't use law of sines. So for this one, I'm going to need to use law of cosines. And the angle that I know is B. So if I'm using law of cosines, then the way you pick like which formula you want to use, it's written 3 different ways. If you know an angle, so you have like side, angle, side, then that's really the one you want to use. So meaning we're going to solve for side B first. So I'm going to set it up as solving for side B. So I'm going to write the formula first. And then fill everything in. So I don't know B, but I know that side A is 16, side C is 42. And again, I know A and C. I also know angle B. So for this one, for side B, I'll be able to type in this whole thing, that's B squared, and then I'll want to square root it to get my answer. So 16 squared plus 42 squared minus 2 times 16 times 42 times the cosine of 120. Again, this is going to give me B squared, so I do need to square root that. And I think it was the same rules. We'll look back. So if I rounded to the nearest tenth, I get 51.9 as side B. Okay. All right, so now you pick, we need two angles. And if I find one of the angles, then I'll be able to get the other by subtracting from 180. So it really doesn't matter which one you pick here. You will have to use, any way you want to do this, you'll have to use what we just found, the 51.9, and that's fine. So you're using something we just found, and so here, just use what you're more comfortable with. If you really like law of cosines, then you may set up law of cosines. You know enough information to use either one. Usually that's how it goes. After you do the first initial step, then you're going to know 4 things, potentially 5, and you'll be able to use whichever law you want to find what's left. Again, I really like law of sines better, so I'm going to set up law of sines. And the ratio that I know is B, so sine of 120 over 51.9 equals. And then you just pick one. Really doesn't matter. I'm going to solve for angle C next. So it equals sine of C over 42. Cross multiply. And divide. And then again, I am solving for an angle, so I will be doing inverse sine of all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and just do inverse sine. You do inverse anytime you're solving for an angle. And then I'm going to type in that whole ratio. But you could type in the fraction first and use the decimal like we did last time. All right, 44.49. So you are rounding to the nearest whole number. This one's so close, I would really take either one. It's not quite 44 and a half, so I am going to round it to 44 degrees. And then we know 120, we know 44, so we know 2 angles. We can subtract from 180 and find the rest. So angle A would be 16 degrees. So we found everything. All right, I'm gonna do one more, just because this was one question that a lot of you still had from Thursday, and that's using law of cosines to find an angle. So let's look at the next problem, which is on slide 30. Okay, and it is triangle ABC. We know all 3 sides. We do not know any angles. So we are going to have to use law of cosines first, because we don't know an angle and the side across from it to set up for law of sines. There is no like starting point. It doesn't matter which one you pick. I always pick the largest angle. So for me, I always pick like side B's the longest side. So angle B should be the biggest angle. There's no rule. That's just how I do it. It just helps me have a place to start. So again, this is going to be the B squared version. All right, I'm going to plug in everything I know. This time I know side B is 19, side A is 17, and side C is 14. And I don't know angle B. So what we want to do is simplify what we can. So I'm going to simplify the 19 squared. So 19 squared is 361. And then I'm going to go ahead and do 17 squared plus 14 squared. And that's 485. Now I cannot go ahead and subtract the next part because all the rest of this is one term. I can simplify it. I can find out what 2 times 17 times 14 is, but I can't actually subtract them. So 2 times 17 times 14, that's minus 476 times the cosine of b. So what I can do now, I can't subtract these. This is all one term, but I can move 485 to the other side. So 361 minus 485. And that's negative 124, which is equal to negative 476 times the cosine of b. So now I can divide by negative 476, and whatever decimal that gives me, that is equal to cosine b. So I'm going to be doing inverse cosine of that decimal, or you could just type the fraction in, either one, to get angle B. So that's what I'm going to type in now, inverse cosine. And then round to the nearest whole number, that's 75 degrees. So I found angle B is 75 degrees. All right, you will have to do another inverse something, whether you do another law of cosines or you choose to do law of sines now to find one more angle. And if you like law of cosines, you could now do law of cosines for c squared or for a squared. That's fine. I prefer, if possible, to use law of sines, so that's what I'm going to do now. I know B, so now I'm going to find A. Okay, so I'm going to cross multiply. And divide. And then inverse sine of that fraction is going to give me my answer. So I get 60 degrees basically. And I can find my third angle now. I know 75 and I know 60. So the other one's going to be what, 45? Yeah, 45 degrees. And again, we could have done law of cosines to find one of these as well. It didn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with, but you had to start with law of cosines the first time.